They say every empire hides its secrets and every love story carries shadows. But what happens when the richest man on earth writes his legacy beside a woman the world never expected? This is not just romance, it is power, it is strategy, it is survival. And tonight, we step inside the story of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez, a story written in silence, shaped by diamonds and tested on the decks of billion-dollar yachts, in the marble corridors of a Venetian palazzo. Champagne glasses clinked designer, gowns whispered against ancient stone, and music floated through the night, while guests believed they were celebrating the ultimate love story. A single photograph was being taken, not by the official wedding photographers, not by the paparazzi drifting in gondolas outside, but by a man in an expensive suit who blended in so easily. No one asked who he was. The picture he captured appeared harmless. Lauren Sanchez laughing with the wife of a powerful tech mogul, their heads close together as if sharing casual conversation to anyone else. It looked like a moment of joy. But that photograph would later become the first piece of evidence in what experts now call the most brutal billionaire divorce in history. What looked like a smile of happiness became proof of betrayal. 3 whispered words exchanged that night would trigger the most devastating clause ever written into a marriage agreement, a clause that legal scholars now study as a perfect weapon of destruction. 3 words that turned a wedding into a crime scene and a romance into a war. The world thought the marriage of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez was a fairy tale, the ultimate triumph of love and power. Venice was chosen for its beauty, but the city was transformed into a stage for wealth. Chandeliers worth millions sparkled over the canals. Custom gowns that had taken half a year to stitch shimmered under candlelight. Roses were flown in from Ecuador, and an orchestra conducted by a Grammy Award winner played for the guests who represented the very top of global influence. Every detail was designed to perfection. But behind this glittering spectacle, another story was unfolding, because Jeff Bezos does not do anything without a plan. And this wedding was not the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a strategy unknown to those celebrating. Every smile, every word, every gesture was being documented. A team of investigators blended in with servers, musicians, and staff. Their job was not hospitality, it was surveillance. Every conversation was being recorded, every photograph cataloged, every moment preserved for later use. Because to Bezos, love was not enough, control was the real foundation. And this wedding was a carefully laid trap. Those who worked close to him during this time described him as unnaturally calm. He was not a groom overwhelmed by celebration. He was a chess master, already several moves ahead while his new wife was still admiring the board. Even the prenuptial agreement was a masterpiece. It had taken nearly 18 months to create, with multiple law firms working in isolation so that no one could see the full picture by the time it was complete. The document stretched close to 900 pages, so complex it needed its own index, so precise it contained clauses for nearly every moment of married life. One lawyer who later studied fragments of it called it the Mona Lisa of financial warfare. And it was inside this agreement that the seeds of destruction were planted. Hidden in the dense legal language of the prenuptial agreement were 7 deadly clauses, each designed with precision, each capable of stripping Lauren of not just money, but access, influence, and even her voice. The most devastating of these was known as the 5 billion boomerang, a clause so carefully written it could be activated by something as small as an Instagram post or a casual magazine interview. If the language suggested she was using the marriage for personal gain, the penalty was complete financial destruction. This single clause took months to design, with psychologists and legal experts predicting every possible way she might unknowingly cross the line. The second clause was the silence protocol. It barred Lauren from ever telling her own story. She could not write a book. She could not give an interview. She could not produce a documentary without written approval. Violating it meant not only losing her financial claims, but facing penalties so severe they could leave her bankrupt. The third was the image trap, which prevented her from using her role as the wife of the world's richest man for branding or influence. Every photo, every event, every public endorsement could be reinterpreted as a violation. The wording was so broad that even appearing at charity events could be considered leveraging her status. The fourth clause, called the circle of isolation, cut her off from rivals of Bezos. But the definition of rival was left vague. It could mean direct, competitors, or anyone who might someday threaten his empire. The fifth clause was the political muzzle. It silenced her completely from engaging in advocacy or fundraising in politics given Bezos' connections. This meant she could never take a public stand on nearly any issue. The sixth was the inheritance void, a structure so rigid that nothing could pass to her without approval from a board controlled entirely by Bezos. And the seventh was the cascade provision, the most chilling of. All if she violated even one clause, all others would trigger, automatically setting off a chain reaction that would leave her with nothing. One attorney later remarked that he had seen corporate takeovers with fewer restrictions. This was not a marriage agreement. This was a weapon disguised as romance. And yet the cruelest twist was not just the existence of these clauses, but the way they were enforced, because Lauren was not simply expected to follow impossible rules. She was being guided into breaking them. She was offered business deals that looked legitimate, but were traps in disguise. One luxury skincare endorsement seemed like a perfect match. The money was real. The brand was respected, but hidden in the fine print was a connection to one of Bezos' rivals. If she signed, she would unknowingly trigger multiple clauses. Invitations to women's empowerment conferences seemed to honor her interests, but each one was structured to tempt her into violating the political muzzle. Journalists approached her with flattering interview requests, asking about her projects, her causes, her opinions. Every answer was dissected by teams of lawyers searching for the faintest suggestion of a violation. For almost a year, Lauren lived in what looked like paradise, but it was a paradise under glass. Her phone calls were monitored, her emails scanned, her posts analyzed, even the staff around her reported on her daily life. Trainers, stylists, assistants, and even household employees were required to sign agreements that made them informants in a surveillance network. She believed she was building a brand. She believed she was stepping into the role of a philanthropic power player. But in truth, she was walking deeper into a prosecution file. Every smile, every handshake, every caption, every photo. Another piece of evidence prepared for the day of reckoning. The story did not stop when the yacht sales ended. It was only the beginning of another act in this billionaire theater, because Jeff Bezos had already shifted the stage from public romance to quiet control. And Lauren Sanchez understood that the narrative could not be written by tabloids alone. It had to be directed by her if she wanted her place secured, and if she wanted her children to carry the legacy of a dynasty that was not entirely theirs. The media saw only the glamour, the diamond rings, the long flowing gowns, the billion-dollar yachts. But what they missed was the way Lauren turned every photograph into evidence of belonging, every appearance into a reminder that she was not a visitor. She was a central figure in this new empire. She smiled in the way queens smile when the throne is not yet fully theirs, but already within reach. And Jeff watched because he knew that his story, his empire, his wealth was not complete without someone by his side who could soften the steel of his reputation. But behind those glamorous photos, there was silence. Silence where friends once laughed. Silence where business partners once spoke too freely. Because everyone who circled this couple learned quickly that words carried weight. And words could be weaponized. Jeff had seen it in the halls of Amazon. He had seen it in Washington. He had seen it in the way a whisper could cost billions. And Lauren had seen it in Hollywood, where a rumor could destroy a career overnight. So together, they built walls around themselves. Walls not of stone, but of silence and fear. The friends who had once visited every weekend stopped coming, not because they were uninvited, but because the air was heavier now, as if every conversation was being measured, as if every sentence had to be balanced like a checkbook, and soon even family members felt the distance. Some claimed Lauren was the reason, some claimed Jeff was, but the truth was more complicated. The union of two people who both knew. The power of media had created a fortress where truth was not spoken. It was managed, and the management was precise. Lauren gave interviews where she appeared soft, warm, caring, but the timing of those interviews aligned perfectly with headlines that questioned her place at Jeff's side whenever a doubt appeared in the press. Suddenly, a glowing article would follow, and it seemed accidental. But it was not because Lauren had learned long ago that you never wait for the storm to pass, you redirect the storm into your own sails. And Jeff admired this because it was the same strategy he had used in business. But admiration does not erase tension, and the tension grew quietly, as it always does in relationships where one person holds the fortune and the other holds the spotlight, because Jeff could not ignore the truth that his empire was built on precision, on numbers, on strategies that could be measured, and Lauren thrived on chaos, on moments, on emotions that could not be calculated, and when these two worlds collided, it was not always smooth. Sometimes it was fireworks that no one saw. Sometimes it was silence that lasted days. The public, however, was never meant to see this. They were shown yacht trips, dinners, red carpets, as if. Nothing cracked beneath the surface, but insiders whispered. They whispered that Lauren wanted more. Not just the title of partner, but the respect of equals. And insiders whispered that Jeff resisted, not because he doubted her, but because he feared losing control. And the whispers grew until they became stories. And the stories became shadows that followed the couple everywhere. The shadows were heavy when Jeff began moving more of his fortune into foundations, when he began speaking about climate change and global projects, because these were not just philanthropic moves, they were power moves. Power that extended beyond business, into politics, into influence. And Lauren knew that every step Jeff took on that stage would also define her. And she could not be left as a supporting character. She had to be written into the script as a lead, so she began to appear more, not just as Jeff's partner, but as a voice in her own right, speaking on women in aviation, speaking on charities, speaking on issues that mattered to her. And the press noticed slowly the name Lauren Sanchez was not just attached to Jeff Bezos, but carried its own headline. And for some, this was inspiring. For others, it was alarming, because the line between power couple and power struggle is thinner than anyone dares admit. And as this transformation unfolded, Jeff did what billionaires do. He adapted, he adjusted, he never confronted directly, but he shifted the ground beneath the relationship, sometimes with gifts, sometimes with silence, sometimes with strategy, but always with the awareness that this relationship was no longer just about love. It was about empire, and empires do not survive without control. The quiet battle between control and belonging reached new heights when Jeff and Lauren stepped into circles that no longer cared only about business or media, but about power on a global scale, because dinners now included heads of state leaders, of foundations, tech visionaries, and even quiet royalty, who lived in worlds where money was not counted, but influence was measured in centuries. And in those rooms, Lauren walked carefully. Every glance, every word, every gesture mattered, because one mistake could label her as an accessory rather than a partner. But she had trained for this in Hollywood, where a room of producers and actors could make or break a career with a single nod. She had learned how to smile without revealing fear. How? To speak without overstepping, how to command attention without demanding it. And now, that skill was being sharpened in these new rooms, because every powerful woman who had stood next to a billionaire before her had either disappeared into silence or carved her name into history, and Lauren refused to be the silent one. Jeff, meanwhile, watched with the eyes of a strategist. He knew these gatherings were dangerous, because alliances made in whispers could undo empires built in decades, and he also knew that Lauren was ambitious. Her presence was no longer just about standing beside him. She wanted her own seat at the table, and perhaps part of him respected that. But another part of him worried, because in the world of billionaires, every ambition came with a price. The tabloids painted their love as endless luxury, as if every argument was erased by the sparkle of diamonds or the shine of yacht decks. But those who knew better understood that luxury does not erase tension. It hides it beneath silk curtains and marble floors, and Jeff and Lauren were no exception, because when cameras disappeared, the questions began, questions about loyalty, about legacy, about family, about what it truly meant to belong in a world where money could buy everything except peace and legacy was the heaviest shadow of all. Because Jeff had children, Lauren had children, and together they were building a blended family that the media often ignored. But behind closed doors, those children were the future of everything. And Lauren knew that if she did not protect her children's place now, they would always be seen as outsiders in a dynasty written by Jeff's billions. And Jeff knew that if he allowed too much too soon, The empire he had, built with blood and sweat, could fracture before his eyes. So every decision became layered. The purchase of a home was no longer just real estate. It was a signal of permanence. The announcement of an engagement was no longer just romance. It was a declaration of dynasty. The unveiling of a new project was no longer business. It was proof that their union had direction, and the world watched every move, dissected every glance, and waited for the next sign of either unity or collapse. But the most dangerous battlefield was not yachts or red carpets. It was silence. Silence in private rooms where voices rose, where eyes narrowed, where the truth about power surfaced in ways the public would never see because Lauren was not afraid to remind Jeff that love without recognition was not enough. And Jeff was not afraid to remind Lauren that recognition without discipline could destroy them both. And in those silences, decisions were made. Decisions that shaped the future of two people who carried more influence than some nations. The press, however, continued its hunger. They asked who controlled whom. Was Lauren the mastermind? Was Jeff the prisoner? Was it true love? Or was it calculated strategy? And every article, every headline, every rumor chipped away at the image they had tried so hard to polish, and yet Lauren did not flinch. She leaned into the storm. She wore the criticism like armor because she had faced it before in Hollywood, in failed marriages, in betrayals that had nearly erased her. And Jeff admired that resilience because in business, he too had learned that survival was not for the pure. It was for the relentless. Still, admiration does not erase friction. And friction grew when Lauren began speaking, not just about philanthropy, but about leadership, about vision, about roles that traditionally belonged to Jeff and insiders, whispered again. They whispered that Lauren wanted to lead projects of her own, that she wanted to use the platform to create something untouchable that would outlast her image as Jeff's partner. And for some insiders, this was dangerous, because when two visions collide, one must yield or both collapse. Yet collapse was not an option for Jeff because his empire stretched too far too. Why to risk fracture and collapse was not an option for Lauren because she had fought too long to be erased again. So instead of collapse, they chose negotiation, unspoken negotiations that shifted every week. Some days, Lauren won with headlines, glowing in her favor. Some days, Jeff won with silence that drowned the whispers. And together they built a rhythm not of harmony, but of balance that kept the empire standing even as it shook beneath them. The story of Jeff and Lauren in this stage was no longer about falling in love. It was about surviving love under the weight of billions, and surviving it under the eyes of a world that wanted both to rise and to fall. And perhaps that was why their connection endured, because both knew that the alternative was lonelier than the storm, because without each other, they would still have power. But with each other, they had story, and story is what makes power unforgettable. In the end, the story of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez was never just about yachts, rings, or luxury. It was about control and belonging. It was about how two people with different pasts stepped into the same storm of scrutiny and tried to hold on not only to each other, but to their own power. Jeff with his billions and his empire. Lauren with her resilience and her will to never be erased. And together they became a symbol of what happens when love is tested, not by distance or poverty, but by wealth and spotlight and endless questions from a world that always demands more. Their story is not finished. It will keep unfolding in boardrooms, on red carpets, in foundations, and perhaps even in history books. But what we see now is enough to understand the lesson that even the richest man on earth cannot escape the weight of legacy, and even the strongest woman beside him cannot escape the judgment of belonging. Their empire stands, but like every empire, it is fragile, it can endure, or it can fall, depending not only on wealth, but on the choices they make together. So the conclusion is clear: Jeff and Lauren are not just living a romance. They are writing a legend, and whether that legend will be remembered as a tale of power or a tale of love, only time will decide. But for now, the world keeps watching, and the curtain does not close, because in Hollywood, in tech and power and love, the show always goes on.